Hey everybody, welcome back. And today we are going to discuss the ego map for the Enneagram Type 8. We're also going to look at their money monsters and their path to money mastery. And of course, all this content comes from my new book, Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram. And it's now available for pre-order on booksellers everywhere. So it releases July 8th. Check it out just in a few weeks. Very excited about that. So please, if you like this content, please order the book, pre-order it, get a copy, share it with your friends. Be a big help for me, and I think you'll get a lot of really useful information out of it. And always, if you need help discovering your Enneagram type, you can always follow this QR code to the IEQ9 Integrative Enneagram Test, which I get a kickback every time you take someone takes a test from this link. It's my unique link. So if you want to support this work and you want to find more about your Enneagram, please check that out as well. Okay, let's jump into it. So for type 8, we need to talk about your sacred wound. And the sacred wound for you is going to be externalized anger. What that means is that, as we've discussed extensively in other videos, when you're born, you're in the womb, you're starting in this space of unconscious unity as you look at the bottom half of the double cone Enneagram, and you're moving up to conscious separation. So you have a sense of place in the world. In order for do that, when you're born, there's this psychological umbilical cord that forms between you and your caregivers and allows them to do most of the driving for your ego in the first few years of your life. And it's necessary to have that egoic codependence. But over time, that egoic codependence has to be cut. And it has to be cut by sharp negative emotions, because positive emotions will just reinforce your connection to your caregivers. And oftentimes these wounds, what I call your sacred wound, it comes in the form of the no's you receive, the way that reality sort of said no to your needs, your wants, your desires, or your need for safety. In the case for type 8s. And so what happened is you got cut. There's only 3. We know from the work of the affective neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp that there are 3 core negative emotions in the limbic system of all mammals, and that kind of resides back here in this deep part of your brain. And they are anger, sadness, and fear. So all your negative emotions that we experience are some combination generally of those 3 emotions: anger, sadness, and fear. And sadness is sometimes understood as shame, and that works as well too. But one of those 3 negative emotions you got hit with more than the others. And for a type 8, it was anger. And usually it comes through some sort of betrayal or lack of support or some sort of like basic reality around you just wasn't a safe place to be in. And so it created a lot of anger inside of you that you then externalized at the world, kind of having a food fight with the world, and you push that out, and that creates your greatest fear, which is being harmed or controlled. You really don't like other people messing with your space, with your opinions. You're doing everything you can to sort of armor up. 8s are that's why I call them the Hummer, or we often call them the Challenger in Type 8. They have their motto is that the best defense is a good offense. So they're always sort of armored up and pushing against the boundaries of reality around them and challenging them in order to keep a rigid sort of defense barrier up between themselves and the rest of the world. And that creates their greatest vice, which again, the traditional terms for the Enneagram are in parentheses here. I've changed those up to make this process a little bit more linear and streamlined for those of you who are new to the Enneagram. But if you're a little more old school, you can use the traditional terms as well. They work just fine. But I think my new terminology is a little bit clearer. So your greatest vice then would be lust, and it's sort of it can often be the form of sexual desire. Type 8s tend to have a very strong libido, but it's also a lust for intensity. It's this lust for this. They have this. The superpower for Type 8s is having a super amount of energy, and so it's this just lust for passion, intensity around them. And so they kind of like a challenge. They like conflict. They're sort of always again pushing against what opinions or ideas, or really trying to establish their own unique place in the world. But this is all hidden in your shadow structure of your personality. And so the way that works for a type 8 is then you develop a primary ego addiction, which is to vengeance. Meaning, when someone steps on your toe, you're going to stomp on their foot. You're not going to put up with a lot of BS from the people around you. And so when someone feels like there's that your boundaries are being intruded upon, or someone is trying to control you or harm you in some way, you have this need to. That's that vengeance. You're gonna have a knee-jerk reaction to push back against other people, and then those boundaries of reality. And so that can get you into trouble. It can work really well. I mean, you make great leaders. Type 8s like to be the boss, in part because they don't want anybody above them telling them what to do. So they make excellent administrators, or they make good CEOs or entrepreneurs. But sometimes when that happens, is that vengeance, when they're constantly pushing against reality all the time, it creates a lot of conflict, and that sometimes there's when the stress that all that boundary pushing creates builds up, and more of it isn't going to solve the problem that is in front of you, or there's sort of like eights are sort of like the irresistible force in it. What happens when it meets an immovable object? What happens when there's a situation or there's problems where you're that sort of offensive approach just isn't going to work? Then you switch to your secondary ego addiction, which is like the inverse. It creates the inverse behavior pattern of your primary ego addiction. And for type 8s, it's going to be stinginess. And stinginess is the primary ego addiction for type 5. So you start to look a little bit more like a type 5, meaning you withdraw into yourself. Instead of being on the offense, you sort of pull all your armor in, and you have this ego stress response, which I call rigid withdrawal. So that stinginess is still combines with your greatest vice of lust, and it creates that ego stress response of rigid withdrawal, which temporarily blocks your need for vengeance or that lust for intensity. So you sort of it's just that, again, it's the opposite response to your normal daily driver of your normal ego addiction. It creates that opposite behavior pattern to try to, and it's a maladaptive strategy, but it still works in the short term to kind of undo some of the damage or prevent more damage from happening that primary ego addiction to vengeance is creating in your life. And you do this unconsciously. You can switch back and forth between your primary and secondary ego addictions many times in a day. But if you really get stuck in that ego stress response for a long period of time, that's a really good sign that something's going haywire in your life, and it's time to step back and reassess where you're at. Because if you stay in that secondary ego addiction for too long, it creates other problems, and those sort of build up, and it needs to be addressed. Okay, so that's your basic shadow structure, and that's the bottom half of the double cone Enneagram. It's really what we call your first half of life. It's where you're establishing your independence. It's a necessary process for you to basically individuate and create a unique being, a you in the reality. But then over time, those ego addictions build up, and your ego gets so strong, it's sort of like a blowfish that's puffed up, and you're now pushing everyone and everything else away, and you enter into what I call the dark night of the soul. And then this is really where our money monsters really take hold. At any point, our money monsters are always with us, but you'll notice the most that dark night of the soul is where they can they'll really come back to bite you. And so for the type 8, there's the money avoidant or money anxious money monster. So again, the avoidant type is the one who likes to push money. It doesn't what that looks like for a type 8. So an avoidant 8s don't tend to avoid money so much. They tend to like money. They tend to engage with it well often. But if they're avoidant, what it means is they become the detonator. I mean, they don't like the limitations or boundaries that a budget is creating, that their income is creating, and they have a tendency to sort of detonate and just explode prudent financial limitations that might be wise to heed. For example, they might be out at a restaurant and they want to pick up the check to show everyone who's the boss, right? Even if they're running up a credit card debt, right? Or they want to, drive a nice car because they want to look important, and maybe that's not necessarily in their budget. Or you're running a business and it's like, well, let's just do it, right? And without really thinking clearly through too much the minutia of all the financial implications that might fall out, because they're just kind of on this hard charging path of just they don't want to be bothered essentially by the nuances of bookkeeping and budgeting and all those things that are necessary in order to have a really stable financial life. And then they can also be the dominator. This is where the money anxious 8 is probably a little bit more common. But the dominator is the one who wants, if you think of like, there's a couple of good shows out there. Was it Billions and Succession? If you think of the lead character in that show Succession, looking at a classic example of a type 8 who just wants all the power, wants all the money, and wants all the resources. They just want to their money becomes a sort of a weapon that they use to dominate and control the circumstances and the people around their lives, which can create a lot of pain and suffering for themselves and for the people around them that they love. And then, of course, we can be anxious or avoidant in different areas of our financial life. So there's what I call the 4 pillars of finance, and that's going to be earning, saving, investing, and giving. So you can be anxious in one area and avoidant in another. Many of us are what I call the jumbled style, where some of us are all anxious or all avoidant, and others of us tend to kind of mix and match depending on the circumstances or the area of our financial life that we're dealing with. So it's important to look, kind of think deeply as a type 8, where do these anxious or avoidant behaviors show up most often? Is it in one area? You might be a very anxious earner, right, making a lot of money, but say an avoidant saver where you're spending everything that's coming out, so you're not really getting to the investing part or having enough resources to really be able to give generously and freely without having to be too worried about it. So those are the basic money monsters for the type 8. And then your path out of this, the path out of your ego addictions and into the healthiest expression of your type, is then to move into that second half of life where you're really understanding your interdependence and establishing that. So you're moving up to that mystical, sort of elusive state of conscious unity with yourself and the rest of reality, understanding that you're a fractal piece of the divine and whatever religious expression that might hold for you. But as we move into the enlightenment structure, for each type, there's a spiritual trap door that we need to be mindful of. And for a type 8, that's going to be joy. Now, joy is a good emotion to have, and we all need it, including type 8s. But it can also, sometimes why you need to be mindful of joy is because it can reinforce your lust for intensity or that need for vengeance, because it feels really good. Like it could be for an 8, it can feel joyful when you're sort of smashing down all the barriers or walls around you or dominating the people around you. That can feel like joy in some. It's like a bull in a china shop, if the bull thought that breaking things was absolutely hilarious, right? So you want to be careful that that you don't fall into that spiritual trap for you, which for others is maybe a good practice. For you, maybe to need to slow your roll a little bit and be careful that desire for lust and the desire for intensity isn't being justified, in a sense, through the fun that you're having in the process, essentially. But then if we can avoid that, and that can come up at any point, we want to then move you into your primary recovery virtue, which is going to be mercy. And that mercy, as type 8s practice it softens that need for vengeance. It softens that need to challenge everybody and the people around you, or the status quo. You're maybe a little bit more forgiving of other people for their stupidity, which annoys you probably to no end at times, or what you see as just other people's crazy and stupidity, which you have this knee-jerk reaction to maybe point out or confront. You're like, okay, I can be a little bit more merciful towards these people, so I'm not on hyper alert. My ego defenses, I'm not up armored all the time. I can soften a little bit and be a little bit more compassionate. And then when that happens, when you could practice more mercy, it opens up your secondary recovery virtue, which for you is honesty. Now, honesty is a primary recovery virtue for a type 2, so you start to look maybe a little bit more like a type 2 helper, where your honesty. So type 8s tend to be very honest with their opinions, but what honesty means in this context is honesty about your emotions. It's about letting that armor soften, about letting people see that warm, soft, tender, gooey side that all the 8s have. Type 8s are very warm and kind people at their core, but they need to sort of let that core, we don't get to see it from you too much until you can really be honest about your emotions and merciful towards yourself, towards the struggles you might be having and the conflicted problems and emotions that you're dealing with, to let other people in, essentially, is what's happening in that point. So when you can combine mercy towards yourself and others with honesty about your emotions and being more vulnerable, that leads to your greatest virtue, which is then going to be innocence, because it's that innocence that you had as a child that was betrayed that sort of created your type 8 personality type. You probably were in a childhood environment that just, it wasn't very safe for a number of reasons, or there were some significant betrayals that you experienced to your safety, and so you basically realize no one's going to take care of me but me. So you become this kind of one man, one woman show where you're not. Yeah, and so that innocence kind of got a little bit lost along the way. That need. So a good example for a Type 8 would be some healthy Type 8s would be Mother Teresa of Calcutta, or Martin Luther King Jr. Both examples of very healthy Type 8s who have this lust for intensity but have then used it to bring to embody a kind of innocence that then allows them to be a greater source of love and justice in the world. And when you can tap into that virtue of innocence, that tender side inside of you, that connection that you can have to the divine, or whatever you want to call the holy or the sacred, that will bring about your greatest hope, which is that to experience complete freedom from harm and control. That's the thing you've always that's your deepest unconscious yearning and longing, but it has to come from internally. Like, you need to find that internal source of strength and contentment and innocence inside yourself that the external world can't touch, right? So Martin Luther King Jr. is a really good example. He was all this social unrest. Of course, he got assassinated. All the horrible things that were coming at him, he was able to sort of transmute them with love, with innocence, and then bring about what the sacred gift for all Type 8s is divine justice. Because as an 8, you have this really strong sense of injustice, which is really the fuel for that lust and the need for vengeance. When something isn't fair, like, you just can't put up with it around you, and you need to challenge it. So it's a good virtue. It's a good thing to have, but you need to then stop. The Type 8 then starts to use that more in love and service to a suffering world. So you stand up for the injustice around you, use your incredible power not so much for self-protection and selfish aims, but to really bring divine justice, that sense of the sacred, into the world, where you're standing up for other people like Martin Luther King and Mother Teresa, or again, to reuse those examples. And then you become the money master, which I call the dynamo. So all this power, all this intensity, all this force that you have inside you then gets used for the good in the world, in whatever capacity that you have for, in whatever profession and whatever walk of life you're in. You now become this dynamo of power, where money becomes this tool in your superhero utility belt to really heal the crack in the world that you were designed to fix. And that's really the path to the Type 8. And if you have any questions, we want more information or go into more depth, please check out my book, Taming Your Money Monster, or go to my website, douglyam.com. You find lots of great resources, a bunch of freebies there. If you want to check those out or join my mailing list, that would be great. So please, as always, remember to like and subscribe to these videos, and subscribe if you enjoy them. And I will see you next time. Take care.